So this here is the Anycubic Photon, and it's a 3D printer. It's an SLA printer to be exact, which means that rather than heating up a filament to lay down layers of plastic, it instead uses UV reactive resin to create a 3D object. At the bottom is a reservoir of resin, and below that is a UV emitting LCD screen, which cures the model in layers, and the model will be moved upwards after each layer cures to cure the next. And I've been using this printer over the last few weeks to create some miniatures. Miniatures like these ones here, which I have printed and painted up. And in this video, I'll be talking about the steps I took to get to this stage and discussing whether or not I think 3D printing miniatures is worth it. So let's go back to the printer again. As I said, this is an Anycubic Photon, and for full disclosure, this was sent to me by Anycubic for a review. And who am I to turn down the opportunity to print out my own dead animal bits? Now, when it did arrive, all I needed to do was to take it out of the box, remove the protective packaging, attach a handle and the plate, and plug the thing in. That was it. No flat pack, and so no construction. However, before I could jump in and start printing, I needed to level the plate, which is that metallic blue upside down trapezoid thing at the top. The leveling ensures that the plate sits parallel against the see-through bottom of the reservoir, and that the first and most important layer cures properly. Getting this right is a very important first step. Now, I had a hard time using the printer paper method that the Anycubic Photon instructions recommend, until I found the Flint reed leveling method, which involves leveling with the reservoir in place. Now, I'm not sure what Anycubic's opinion on this particular leveling process is, but I found it the most helpful and easiest for myself, and that is a thought shared by many people who use this. Now, I won't go into detail on what that entails, but I will include links to some videos that do outline the steps to take, and I'll include those in the description below. So, now your plate is leveled and you're ready to get the resin, but before you do, you'll need PPE, which means a mask, gloves, and some eye protection. Now, the set does come with a mask itself, but you will need to provide your own gloves and eye protection. I've just used my own mask here. Now, this is because uncured resin is pretty nasty stuff, and you don't want to be breathing it in, getting it on your hands or in your eyes, or even on your clothes. So always take precautions and work in well-ventilated areas with the relevant protection. And also stay out of direct sunlight, because that will prematurely cure your resin. Now, you will also notice I've sat my photon in a cardboard box. This isn't entirely necessary, but it will just protect the surface I'm working on should I spill the resin, or should something go horribly wrong. Once you're set, you can go ahead and pour in your resin to the reservoir. The photon comes with 500 milliliters of clear green resin, which is what I'm using here, but there are a whole bunch of other colors and types available. Now, 500 ml might not seem like loads, but miniatures require only a very small amount, so one bottle will go a lot further than you expect. So when you're filling that reservoir, you only need to fill your vat up to about a third of the way. Now, this is important because overfilling will cause the resin to spill out when the plate is submerged. Don't go crazy here unless you want a nasty mess to clean up. So once you've filled, you can go ahead and close your cover and remove your PPE. Now that our printer is ready to go, we just need some miniatures to print. Now, there are a whole ton of files out there to print, but I'm mainly going to be focusing on miniature wargame related items. So the first port of call is Thingiverse, which has a whole bunch of familiar looking items, of course, if you know the right search terms. These are all freely available, but if there are particular creators out there you like, it's always good to support your favorite creators. However, the best and most comprehensive range of models that I've found does come with a price tag, albeit a relatively small one. There are a whole bunch of Patreons out there which will provide you with a pack of files monthly in exchange for a fee, just like Anvil Industries Digital Forge, which I've used one of the models of. Alternatively, you have creators like the Maker Cult who have both Patreons and individual files available to purchase as well. Now, these files are downloaded as .stl file types, which I'll cover in a minute. And once you have these files, you can print with them as many times as you want. I mean, imagine if buying a model kit allowed you to go back to the shop and pick up another one for free at any time. Well, that's essentially what 3D printing allows for. Now, once you've acquired an STL, you will need to do a couple of things with it before you can begin printing. First, you will need to add support. Because your model is printed from the bottom up, you need to make sure that any overhangs are supported, otherwise your finished miniature will have bits missing. This is an extremely important step. Now, some part files do come pre-supported, which is great, but others don't, which means you need to add your own. Now, the Anycubic Photon comes with some software that allows you to support and slice your models, but personally, I've been using software like Prusa Slicer. Here I can import my STLs into the software and use its auto orientation and auto support features, which best work out what needs support and adds the support accordingly. This has worked really well for me so far, and I'd highly recommend checking it out. Now, once your model has support, you can save it as an STL once again, but STLs themselves can't be printed on your printer. You need to slice them first. Again, Anycubic has software for this, but I've been using Chitubox instead. Here you import your supported STLs, you set up the relevant settings for your printer, the Anycubic Photon in my case, and adjust the print settings based on the quality and the type of resin you're using. Now, this can be a bit overwhelming, and this is often where failed prints are caused. However, there is a great resource for working out the right settings, which I'll add to the description below, and that covers loads of different printer types and loads of different resin types as well. Now, so once you have your file set, you can then slice your model. This is done by the software, and it basically converts the model into a series of layers that your printer can understand. It will also give you the estimated print time, cost of the resin, and a .photon file, which is what your printer will read. All you need to do then is to copy the slice file, the .photon file, onto a thumb drive and stick it into the USB slot of your printer. And with that, all you need to do then is to select print and choose the file you want to print out. From here, you can step back and come back in 8 hours. Seriously, these things take a long time, and these are only fairly small prints as well. So once your print is complete, and provided it hasn't failed, which it often can, you should be left with an upside down model stuck to your plate, dripping uncured resin. So don your PPE once again and remove the plate. Keep plenty of paper towels to hand for this bit, as it can get very messy. You'll need to chip your resin off your plate for this next bit. The Photon does come with a small plastic scraper, but a sharp metal one like this will give you a much finer edge and make it easier to remove them. Keep the scraper as flat against the plate as possible, and with a short, sharp push, the model should pop off. These miniatures still have uncured resin on them, which will need to be cleaned off. You can use isopropyl alcohol or IPA for this. Fill a tub like the one I have here and drop your models in it. Let them sit for a while to allow the resin to wash off. Now, this particular tub is pretty cool because of this little tray insert that you can just pull up to get the models out without having to dip your fingers into the alcohol. Now, once removed, allow the alcohol on the models to evaporate. So currently, the resin of your models still won't be fully cured, which means it will still be slightly soft and can potentially be damaged. Because the resin is UV sensitive, you can either leave the model out in the sun for a few minutes, or if you live in England, you can use one of these UV nail lights that you can pick up on Amazon. This will harden the model and allow us to work with it. So now we have a model that has been cleaned and cured, but still has the supports attached to it. Now, most of these supports are fairly loosely attached that can be removed with your fingers, but using some clippers will give you some finer control. With these removed, you might need to do a little filing down of some surfaces where the supports are attached or where the ridges might have formed because of the printing process. Again, do wear a mask for this because resin dust is pretty bad for you. If you're familiar with working with resin miniatures, then all this kind of process won't be at all unfamiliar to you, and you can pretty much use the same tools and techniques. Then, once you're prepped, you can prime and paint your models as normal, which should leave you with something that looks like this. Now, this miniature is a Ranger Captain from the Anvil Industry Digital Forge Patreon. As you can see, the quality is fantastic, and it's something that really did surprise me about 3D printing. I kind of had it in my mind that it was a little bit soft, it was a little bit layered. It didn't have quite the same kind of quality as regular miniatures, but this kind of detail is definitely something you would easily expect to see on resin miniatures purchased from proper miniature manufacturers. Now, there's also something extremely satisfying about printing your own minis. Knowing that you start off with a bottle of liquid resin and end up with something physical and tangible, it's kind of addictive. You want to keep printing and improving the quality with little tweaks and changes, and you just kind of keep going at it and keep trying to print off more and more elaborate stuff. Now, the miniature you saw me print on the printer is this one here from the Maker's Cult. As you can see, even the slightly smaller miniatures with finer details come out looking good too. But 3D printing isn't all sunshine and daisies. Let's talk about some of the drawbacks. So first of all, I had a whole bunch of failed prints before I got my head around what the problem was. Often you don't realize your print has failed until it's completed and you've wasted several hours. You then need to clean out your resin and start all over again, not being entirely sure that you've solved the problem until your next print finishes. Now, this can be extremely frustrating, and I did come very close to giving up with it. But when your first print finally succeeds, it feels great, and it will just spur you on to do more and more. Now, there is the other elephant in the room, and that is the time, which for the most part is fine because you could just set one of these off overnight, and in the morning, you've got yourself a few brand new models. But the printer isn't entirely silent, which means unless you have an outside building or particularly dense walls, you will be able to hear the printer running in the next room, which can cause problems with neighbors or your partners. So, is 3D printing miniatures worth it? Most definitely. It's an upfront investment. Getting yourself kitted out with the printer, the extra bits and the files will require a good investment of cash and time to start off with, but once you're up and running, you can be printing off entire armies at your own pace. There are of course limits. Resin is still trickier to work with than plastic, and there is also still a lot of prep required to get your miniatures ready for painting, but the selection of miniatures available as STLs is growing day by day, and the quality of these is improving too. So if you're looking to add some cool designs to your collection or build completely new collections, then 3D printing is definitely worth getting on board with. As I mentioned earlier, the printer I used here is the Anycubic Photon, and whilst I didn't really review this in particular, this is the first 3D printer I've ever used, so it's very hard to compare it with anything else, but to be honest, I've actually found it really easy to work with. The problems that I had weren't really down to the printer itself, but more just 3D printing in general. So if you want to kind of get started with 3D printing, it's actually a really good one to get started with. It was very set up, and the price point is really quite reasonable as well. And you can find a link to it in the description below. I'll also include all the useful resources, settings, and videos that I came across when getting to grips with 3D printing, and do expect to see much more 3D printing content in the future. So, all that's left to say is, thanks for watching, and goodbye.